we're going to kick things off. We're going to go straight into it. This week, we're going to be covering a topic that we've been discussing a lot lately on the presentations, which is metabolic adaptation. As we talk through the phases of physique development, we did touch on this a lot with the initial phase, which we will talk about later on this presentation as well. And it got a lot of people asking questions because there's not much data to actually back up what we were saying. And the last thing we want to do is come across as bro sciencey, but from the experience we've had working with people over the years, especially when they've got 15 to 20 years to 30 years of binge restrict cycle dieting going on, significantly decreased level of calorie intake to then massive binges on the weekend or stuff like that, or sometimes actually just restricting themselves to low calories for the majority of the time, and still carrying a lot of body fat. It just doesn't make sense. When we listen to everyone online just preach calorie deficit, you're like, well, I can't take my calories any lower than 800. What do I do? This presentation is going to explain exactly why that is happening and what's going on. The reason there aren't many long-term studies on this is simply because of the time involved. Like when you think we are talking about clients that have had a life of like 20, 30 years of doing this to themselves, they're not going to be involved in a study or a scientific study yet. I'm sure in years down the line, they will have these studies going on at the moment. And then we'll have some, real world data to back up what we're saying. But we have got some studies, some as long as 10 years. That's what we've got, the best that we've found. So yeah, we're going to talk about that, metabolic adaptation. But first of all, we're going to dive into the other side of this, which is total daily energy expenditure, and explain what goes into that. The reason I didn't want to make it all about that is because we have actually covered this previously on a Team Talk presentation before, where we just talked you through what actually goes into calculating calories. We just dive in deeper into that this time, and then going to explain exactly why metabolic adaptation does take place. As always, any questions throughout, please stop me at any point, because this is more of an interactive call. It's not just like a presentation where I tell you everything and you just stand there and listen. We want to get you involved with questions, so we're going to use the chat box to actually do that. So make sure you pull up that chat box on your screen. You will all have access to it. And we're going to kick it off as well, right, with just a question for you all. Would you say that you actually have a fast, average, or slow metabolism? Because I'm sure at some point we've all like self-diagnosed ourselves with how fast or slow metabolism is. So yeah, I would definitely put myself on the slower side, actually, just based off how I was when I was younger. And as we'll talk about, the more muscle mass that you actually have, the better the higher your metabolic rate will be. So that's a very interesting bonus to chasing more muscle, is you can eat more. So anyone that likes to eat food, get some more muscle mass on your frame. But yeah, I'm going to pull up the chat now as well, because I can't see it at the moment. Here we go. Cool. Yeah, Tommy's definitely got a fast metabolism. 100%. Yeah. Everyone else get involved as well. You've all got the chat, right? So we want to make this more interactive. We know there's more of you in here, so chuck some answers in there now. It's interesting because I was expecting most people to go on the slower side, definitely. Cool. Okay, I won't keep you too long with this question anyway. So firstly, we're going to cover some of the basics, right? So bear with me on this, because I know most of you now are well aware of what these things are, but we want to just cover it before we go in, so that any of you that are unsure, at least you'll know. So calories equals energy. We know that now. It actually is defined as the energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water through 1 degree Celsius. So it's a measurement of energy, right? So it makes sense like that. And then it will allow you to understand further on as well how the law of thermodynamics, it can't be argued against, really. But the reason why you may be eating very low calories and thinking, oh, a calorie deficit doesn't work, is because you're actually not in a deficit for you. Which is interesting. So yeah, it's just a measurement of energy and food. Energy balance equation, very simple: calories in versus calories out. The energy can't be created or destroyed. Okay, common terms that you need to know. The maintenance calories is when calories in is equal to calories out. Surplus of calories is when calories is greater than calories out. This will lead to fat storage or weight gain, but is also crucial to allow non-essential processes to take place in the body, aka growth and repair. This is why when people are trying to gain muscle, we preach a calorie surplus just to make sure that you've got an abundance of energy there to allow that process to take place to its maximum effect. The deficit calories is calories is lesser than calories out. This will lead to fat stores being broken down and used as energy to fill the gap in the deficit. We'll go through this in a graph as well, so you can clearly see what I'm talking about. So those of you that are more like visual learners, this will make a lot more sense. Yeah, and don't worry, Fen. I've just seen that message now. Okay, so energy balance equation. Can you list the breakdown of the equation? So this is a question to you guys now. Use in the chat, be brave, because I'm going to ask you to be a bit vulnerable with putting in more than just a yes or no answer. Can you actually list the breakdown of what goes into calories in and what makes up calories out? We did touch on it at the start, right on the title as well. So yeah, I'll give you 30 seconds for that.
Can me and Shiv say or?
Yeah, you can definitely have a go as well. If you get it wrong, it's embarrassing for you though, then, isn't
Yeah, no.
it? Seems like I'm just going to talk to myself tonight. Okay.
Go for
So,
it.
continuing on, right? The energy balance equation continued. This is the breakdown. So this is all I was asking for. Very simple. I know you probably thought it was a trick question. It's just a very simple question. Calories in is made up of macros. We've got protein, carbs, fats, and alcohol, right? Just to go through that as well. Protein is 4 calories per gram. Carbs is 4 calories per gram. Fats is 9 calories per gram. And alcohol is 7 calories per gram. And that is net grams. Okay, so people get confused because they see a carb source when in reality they are still made up of all the macros when you look at the nutritional values, but we do tend to associate certain foods with certain macro groups. For example, protein, we think of like chicken, but there's still some fats in chicken, and actually trace carbs as well. Same for carb sources. When we look at like something like a bagel, you'd think, oh, it's a carb source, it's bread, right? But it's actually got quite a lot of protein in there, and the fats are fairly low, but there's still some trace fats. So there's not one food group that is just solely one macronutrient. So that's why when we're looking at like grams and we're talking about grams of protein, grams of carbs, they're net grams of the food, not the other way around. So hopefully that makes sense. But we're not going to dive deep into that this time. We're going to focus more on the calories out. So we've got BMR, NEAT, EAT, and TEF. So I'm going to break these down further anyway, but answer yes or no if you're brave. Did you actually know that if that was what I was on about when I asked you that question earlier on? So yeah, this is TDEE, so total daily energy expenditure. This is what we're going to be discussing on this now, over the next few slides, just to go into a little bit more detail for you, right? So again, diving deeper into what I just said. So energy expenditure. We've got BMR, so basal metabolic rate. This is what, I'm just going to actually read it first and then I'm going to go off on a tangent. So this is the rate at which the body uses energy to maintain vital metabolic functions such as breathing and maintaining temperature. This is what people refer to when they say they have a slow metabolism. That's why I asked you at the start as well. So BMR differs massively from person to person, and this can drastically be impacted over time. This is exactly what we're going to dive deep into. BMR is the biggest sort of controller of where metabolic adaptation takes place, as well as NEAT. So we will be talking about that further on as well. But when you're talking about saying, oh, my metabolism is slow, this makes up the largest percentage of total daily energy expenditure as well. BMR is actually the biggest controller of that. So people think, I've got to do more cardio, I've got to do more weight training, I can't lose weight without that, when that's totally wrong. Have you ever tried to, when you do cardio, right, and you're looking at the numbers racking up on the machines, whether they're accurate or not is a different sort of discussion. But when you're seeing how long it takes you to burn off 100 calories, 200 calories, 300 calories, and then you're going away and you're eating like 2,000 to 3,000 calories a day as a male potentially, right? You cannot be making that energy expenditure up from simply from training alone. You know, that demand is not being created from training alone, not even from NEAT either. It's actually from your BMR. So that's the biggest, like I said, contributor to energy expenditure for the day. It's your body basically working to survive throughout the whole day. And that would happen even at rest. So moving on to NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. The energy expended from anything that is not basic survival, sleeping, eating, or specific training activity. A few examples of this would be our step target, activity from work. Bricky would be more labor intensive than a desk job, for example, and just daily activities such as cleaning the house. We're not going to point any fingers there. But yeah, so so anyway, yeah, with NEAT, right? Where people get confused with this is because the word exercise is in it and they think it's something to do with exercise, but it's actually the complete opposite. And that's where step target is, again, one of those like controversial ones, because yes, we're tracking steps, right? But it's not specific exercise. It's not. And those of you that want to call walking cardio, it's really, really not. Unless your heart rate, you're that unfit, which I was before, that your heart rate is being elevated for a prolonged period of time, then yes, you can class it as cardio, which we dive deep into on the presentation on cardio and the best cardio for fat loss. But the step target isn't actually, exercise specific. It's definitely not. So again, these are the things that we're calculating through the day. That's why we do track the step target to get an idea of NEAT. The same with anyone that of what job they've got, what occupation you've got, how hard are you working throughout the day. That example is perfect, because someone who's a brickie doing manual labor all day is going to be completely different to someone like myself at the moment that's sitting down at a desk all day. I've been surprised myself to see how much my energy demand for food has changed. The more I'm forced to sit behind a desk compared to what I was like before, working on a gym floor, just always walking around. Even that change from just racking up steps from doing that compared to sitting down all the time is a massive difference. There was even a study done where they calculated that if you just simply stand up by a desk, you've seen a lot of people have stand-up desks now, you almost double the amount of calorie burn that you have from that specific, basically non-exercise activity thermogenesis. You're either sitting or standing. It's much better to just stand, but we don't want to do that. But if you are in a deficit, these are the things that we look at. If you work in a desk job, we're like, right, can you actually stand for a few hours while you're working rather than actually sit down? So that's interesting as well. Okay, so EAT. Exercise activity thermogenesis. This is the rate at which the body expends energy when the client is specifically attempting exercise. This can be anything from planned cardio or weight training, anything sports specific, and also will also come into this category. So it's very simple, this one. Anything that you actually specifically do to burn calories. That may not be the reason to actually burn calories, but anything that you're actually forcing yourself out to exercise. So this would be your weight training, it could be swimming, it could be sport. It's just simple. I'm not going to waste your time with this one, but like I said, what's important to note is the calories that you burn from this is not that significant compared to everything else. When we put it together and we add it together, it's quite surprising, and it's what I want to get across to people that believe that they can't chase their physique goal because they're short on time and they can't get to the gym. And I'm like, or can you at least get like 2 or 3 sessions in the gym, just to actually make sure that you're taking care of the muscle mass standpoint and all the benefits that comes with resistance training, and then the fat loss will be occurring because we've created a deficit elsewhere. That's not the way to do it. Of course, when we get deep into it and depending on the speed that you want results, then we can speed that up by putting more and driving more energy expenditure from EAT. Like that's one of the best ways to do it. So yeah. TEF, the thermic effect of feeding. The increase in metabolic rate following the ingestion of food. This is usually left out of most people's equations. However, it plays a big role, especially for those on high protein diets. What this essentially means is how many calories is burned via the digestion process of a meal. For example, protein has a very high TEF rating. Just to give you an example on that, for every 100 calories of protein consumed, on average, 30% of those calories will be utilized through the digestion process alone. That is mad. That like blew my mind the first time I learned about this. I was like, this is crazy. So what does that tell you, right? Number one, we know that for the body to actually convert protein into glucose or glycogen to be stored, and then actually converted into fat as well, that is an extremely difficult process and taxing process. And you would actually then, that percentage rating would actually go up again, right? So what that's saying is, if you take in 100 calories from protein source, and that's net grams of protein, then you are only going to be able to utilize 70 calories from that as energy. And again, like I said, if your body was in a surplus and it was going to store that, it would be even less available again, because it would have to utilize energy to convert it into fat storage, right? So that's a crazy concept. So if you are really hungry and you're going to snack on something, a protein source is the best thing to go for, because the calories that you take in from that, yes, you're pushing yourself above, but it's going to be utilized a lot, and a lot of those extra calories are going to be utilized in just digesting that source alone. So that's a good thing to think about. And it's very, I can never say the word satiating. It's very satiating as well for you to have that source over any other macronutrient. With the others, unfortunately, they're not as good. So carbs are usually 6 to 8%. Fats are much lower with 2 to 3%, which is funny because fats is the highest calories per gram as well, with 9 calories per gram. So that's why it's much better to, opt for a protein source if you are struggling with your diet. But yeah, thermic factor feeding is a very interesting one, and I know not many people are aware of it. So hopefully, maybe put come on, I can get you to say yes in the chat, right? Have you ever heard of that before? Let me know yes or no, and then we'll know if you've actually learned something today. No, good. Okay, cool. What do you think is the most difficult to work out? This is testing you now, because you need to actually write something. And I know you're there now because you just wrote no. So I'll give you 30 seconds on this one before I'll start talking as well, and you can still keep typing if you want. But what do you think is the most difficult to work out when we talk about all the different? So we talked about all 4, right? So we've got BMR, based on metabolic rate. We got NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. We've got EAT, exercise activity thermogenesis, and TEF. Which ones do you think is the most difficult to calculate? So the answer is literally either BMR, NEAT, EAT, or TEF. Be brave. Have a go. Just have a shot. It's like a multiple choice.
Wait.
See Joe smirking. He's like, I'm trying my best. Yeah, awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Most of you. All right. Anyway, I'm not going to call you up. But yeah, BMR is definitely the most difficult one to actually calculate. When you think about it, everything else we can kind of control. Like NEAT, we can track a little bit of it, and we kind of know what we're doing. With EAT, yeah, exercise activity thermogenesis. Again, there's so many trackers for that now. There's a full debate on how accurate those calorie calculations are, and most of the time, just to pre-warn you, they are overestimated in terms of the calorie consumption, calorie expended from those sessions. Like, I get some people telling me that they burn 1,500 calories from a session, and I'm like, you really didn't. Unless you absolutely grafted for like 2 hours non-stop. But yeah, it's hard to burn calories like that. The only time you'd probably see that type of calorie burn would be from like a very intense sports game or something like that. So yeah, with the others, like I was saying, like TEF, you can even roughly calculate that as well, knowing from the amount of food that you intake, you can kind of work out, if you did want to, the amount of calories you could estimate that you would be burning through the digestion process. So BMR is the most difficult, not only because we have got the equations available to us, and we've got experience available to us, but what you never have 100% is that client's history, that person's history of what they've done throughout the years, how they metabolism has adapted over the years, how their BMR has adapted over the years, the genetics. And anyway, before going off on a tangent, I'm going to talk you through exactly these few points and these drawbacks, essentially, that are controlling your BMR, making them so different to someone else's. So muscle mass, we touched on this at the start. More muscle equals a higher metabolic rate. So muscle mass is more metabolically active than any other tissue, meaning its energy demand is much higher. It's estimated for every 1 pound of muscle gained, an additional 10 calories is required to maintain it at rest. The true calculation is estimated much higher. Now, this blew me away when I first read this because I was like, that's a low number. Like, that seems really low. For 1 pound of pure muscle extra, you're only burning 10 calories per day, that is mind. So I really done a lot of research into this and I dug into it, and that's what the calculations are showing us. But personally, this is my opinion now. From diving deep into bodybuilding and speaking to other people there and the amount of calories that they're on and stuff like that, it's definitely much higher. Like, even if you work out, someone who's gained potentially 100 pounds of lean tissue, right? So they could have gone from 150 pounds as a kid, as a male now to a pro bodybuilder weighing lean 250 pounds. It's an extra 100 pounds of muscle. I know for a fact that the BMR is much higher than just an extra 1,000 calories. I think I've done that calculation correct. Yeah, so it would be way higher than 1,000 calories extra on their BMR. I know that for a fact. So yeah, the only other potential from that is, because it does say at rest, is that if once you are working, everything else is increased as well in terms of the energy demand being increased overall. So as you can see, even just from this conversation, there's still a lot of theory involved. And there's very little proof, and that's why we struggle to calculate it accurately from day one. And that's the key from day one. Once you start working with someone, you can pretty much work it out straight away. Genetics, up to 60% variation in BMR in individuals of the same stats. So if you took someone that is a clone of me, right, and they've just got a different genetic makeup, there has been shown to be up to a 60% variation in their BMR. So that shows how much of a genetic role there is. And that's why I asked you all the question at the start, because it is a good question. Do you think you have a fast, slow, or average metabolism? And that's because genetically, some of you will have an extremely fast metabolism. Some of you will have a slow metabolism. And there's as you can see, there's a large variation in how far that spectrum actually shows you. So it's pretty crazy when you're trying to work it out. And you can gauge it, and we gauge it from just asking you lots of questions about what you've been doing right now, what you've been doing over the past. We dive deep into figuring out who you are and how you've struggled and stuff like that, and that gives us a good idea of where to start. And then we just judge it off how we go along. So genetic variations can affect the way your body uses and metabolizes energy. Variations in genes that regulate the thyroid's production of T3 and 4. So that is usually the main driver in changing your genetic metabolism. So your genetic sort of BMR is usually due to your thyroid production. And again, this can be tested. So if you were to get blood work done, bodybuilders do this very often because sometimes they do mess about with those hormones as well. As with everything else, T3 and T4 is commonly used in bodybuilding. So when people, and this is, I've actually done this myself. I've trialed this myself with regards to blood work, right? So when I went through a prep, I was having my blood work done at frequent times throughout my prep, and I saw naturally, without using the drugs, which is what they are, T3 and T4, I saw a natural decline in output of T3 and T4 from my thyroid, which is crazy. That's actually crazy when you see it, right? When you see the data, it just shows how your body is literally adapting in real time to what's going on. So obviously I was in an extreme deficit. What your body's doing when you think about it logically is like, right, we're constantly having a deficit in terms of the food that we actually need and the food we're getting fed, right? So your body then is thinking, right, okay, well, the demand needs to come down then because we're not getting this food. So I need to do something to bring my demand down. And that's where T3 and T4 will decrease. So that's your body's way of coping very quickly, because producing hormones is something they can control today, right now. So that's really interesting as well. Another thing that it does is non-essential processes will start to either shut off or slow down. So this is things we talk about when we talk about genuine movements. So have you ever found that if you slam a load of food I need to talk a bit better than that. When you take in a lot of calories, a lot of sugar, something like that, do you ever find that like you're fidgeting a lot more, you're tapping your feet, or if you have caffeine, you're tapping your feet, you know, you're having all these little movements. Those are what we call like non-essential processes. Now, they wouldn't be happening when your body is trying to preserve every single calorie that's coming in. Those things just stop and you just become a bit of a zombie. So yeah, you do notice that as well. The history of the client, I put that in caps because that is the most important, I believe. And what we've seen with working with more often than not women over the years that have gone through this because they've been fed their whole life that they have to eat like nothing. And when you're told that since you were a kid, even working with us now, it's hard to get people to trust us to eat more. Like that's the most difficult thing we find is when we tell them, right, you need to be eating, even if it's something that's just bumping them up to like 1,600, because you don't even want to, we don't even want to go into what some of them have actually been doing. And I feel for them genuinely because it's just poor information being fed to them over the years and they don't know what to do and they don't know where to turn. And it's like, my God, I need to eat. And it just creates that binge restrict cycle. But you multiply that by years of doing that to your body, and it's in a pretty bad way. So it does take time to bring you out of that and actually regain what normal function should be. So yeah, history is a fact that a prolonged deficit or under eating will slow down your BMR. The binge restrict cycle or low calorie diets, and we're talking very low calorie diets, significantly decreases BMR. An interesting study on patients undergoing gastric surgery, and this was really cool, shown after 10 years, their metabolic rate had decreased by up to 600 calories per day. That's just BMR. That's not total daily expenditure as well. That's just from BMR. So imagine now that most women are told to eat 1,500 calories a day, right? That's probably the general guidelines, I'd say, the women are told anyway. Now, if you take 600 calories a day off that, you're down to 900 calories. Like that's mad. And that's what your body has adapted to, right? So this is actually taking place from under eating for so long. So this is what people don't realize. This is what's actually happening on a deeper level. So for what we need to do, and this is what we talk about when we go through the next phase and the recomp phase, the rebuilding phase, sorry, is actually kind of kickstarting that engine and getting things firing again at a controlled rate so that you're not going to be in a massive surplus. Because if you say to that client, their BMR is at 900 calories now, and if you do give them 2,000 calories, which is what they should be having, right? Then they on day one, they're in a 1,100 calorie surplus. That's why you see people who most of the time don't eat anything, and then one day they'll binge, they will store all that as fat. They're in the worst possible place. And I'm like passionate about this because I feel for them. But it is something that you can get out of. It's just, this is why it's happening. It's nice to know why. And hopefully this will educate people on why that's going on. Like I said, if you want to stop me at any time as well, if you've got any questions, just fire them in the chat or cut me off. Okay, so adaptive thermogenesis. Okay, did you know? Little fancy thing there as well. So these facts are scientifically backed up. Like we said before, we went through a few studies on this one just to make sure we got the facts right. This is the truth of what happens deep down when you consume. Oh, fuck, I haven't changed that. Sorry. When you consume, I'm going to ignore that. That was meant to come out. So anyway, adaptive thermogenesis is a process of your BMR. And just actually, there's a little plug there as well. So if you want to watch our alcohol one last week, it was actually really good. So yeah, go back and watch that one afterwards. So anyway, going on. Adaptive thermogenesis, AT, is the process of your BMR adjusting for survival, right? That's a key point, which is what we discussed earlier on. Your metabolism will adapt based on the calories consumed. If you continue to eat more or less, the body will adapt quickly. So it's exactly the same when you switch it around. So we've seen this a lot with guys as well, especially to those that are really trying to put on muscle. We build them up to a point where they're consuming 3,000, 3,500, 4,000, 4,500 calories. And it'll get to a point where the scales still don't move. Like they don't actually increase. And when you look at what a normal man should eat, they are well in a surplus technically, and you use all the calculators in the world and they'll tell you you're in a surplus, but it's not the case because your body does adapt. So we need to make sure that we either continue to push up and make sure we have a little small surplus to make sure we are pushing forward, or this is when we talk about, a recomp phase and pulling you back down to get the body more responsive again, and then pushing up again. And you'll find you can actually still build on lower calories then again, because that adaptive process is taking place on the way back down. So anyway, going off on a tangent there. There are both short and long-term adaptations that take place as well. So that's an interesting one. So when you look at short-term, adaptations can take place very quickly, as we talked about with the hormonal response. Whereas long-term, there can be some more serious effects as well, where your metabolism has slowed down to a point where it will take a lot to actually pull that back into place. And the easiest way to think of this is like an engine. It's like, it is literally like restarting an engine. If it's off, it's not going to be working well. It's not going to be firing well. But if you just slowly build it up and keep it running, it's going to run a lot more smoothly, So a decrease in glycogen stores initially in a deficit will cause short-term AT. This is why it's best to hit maintenance prior to a deficit. Now, this is my opinion more often than not, because there's not much science to back this sort of statement up, but I just wanted to put that in there because this is what I do believe, and it's what I like to do with clients, is bring them, if they're in a surplus and they have been for a long time, bring them back into a maintenance phase prior to a deficit. So you're not having that large drop in calories. And I'm talking about a big drop now, because if you go from a surplus all the way to what a calculator is telling you a deficit should be, that could potentially be like a 2,000 calorie drop. And my way of playing it is like, okay, why don't we just make sure that we take you down to where we believe your maintenance is, based off where you are right now, how you're gaining, the rate you're gaining, and where we believe the surplus is. So we'll work off that, get to maintenance, drop all the water, a little bit of glycogen comes down, you're not as full, and then we dive you deeper into a deficit, into a fat loss phase. And it's just a much more smoother process for the body. Whereas, again, I don't want to go all bro sciencey, but it's not a shock where you're like, well, 1 week you're being overfed and then all of a sudden you're just not getting anywhere near what you used to. Is that going to allow for an adaptive process to take place? Then more than likely, yes. And we did find some studies on this as well. So in a controlled study where patients had 50% of their maintenance, a large drop of BMR by 178 calories was recorded in just 1 week. And that's exactly the scenario I'm talking about there. So if we do dive down initially, very quickly, like that's extreme. That's 50% of maintenance, right? So if you worked out your maintenance to be 1,500, that's literally feeding them 750 calories. Of course, the body's going to react to that, respond to that very quickly. And it's shown a decrease in the BMR by 178 calories, which is a lot in 1 week. So that's, again, a short-term adaptation. NEAT is where the majority of AT happens via non-essential processes. This was interesting. This is inevitable in a dieting phase, but the goal should be to recover this post-dieting without gaining body fat, aka reverse dieting. So that's exactly what I just talked about as well. With the reverse process, as we talk about that, we slowly start to build you up. We've seen this with girls, working with Shiv. That's why she's laughing and smiling there, because we get girls to eat in close to like 2,500, 3,000 calories. And they're like, oh my God, this is like heaven. But yeah, everything's just so much better when you feed in your body what it needs, and it starts responding better. NEAT starts to move up, as we talked about there, is where the most takes place. And that's what I've experienced myself personally as well. Through going through a bodybuilding prep, you notice NEAT just drop to zero. Like it literally you will pull yourself down to zero. And you won't have energy to do anything else but what is essential. And that is not a good place to be, because that's not how life should be lived. It's terrible. Would not recommend. But anyway, okay, so a little question for you here. I can't quite see it at the moment, not gonna lie. So have you noticed, this is a question, just a yes or no answer, so you can definitely take part in this one, right? Have you noticed a slowdown in your metabolism when dieting over the years? Have you ever felt it? Have you ever made that comment? Have you said, "Oh, my metabolism is getting slower. I'm not losing as much weight as I think I should be"? Yes or no? In the chat box. It's a tough crowd tonight. No, cool. Yeah, I think it's a mixed response. I was expecting a mixed response from this one. I think what you will definitely notice is well, if you do it right, you shouldn't notice it, to be fair, until the end, until the very end. But if you are one of those that have potentially crash dieted before, you probably would have definitely noticed it more, or felt it more. So yeah, it's one of those things that we try to avoid as best we can. Okay, so this is why we place so much value on the rebuild phase. So we've done a full presentation on the different phases that we use for a physique transformation. So that's a really interesting one. If you do want to understand more about where you are, or where you're going, or what's coming up in future for you. And again, just to add to that, the most important phase is what follows. So that's really, really important to actually touch on that, which is basically maintaining the results that you've always wanted. That's the most important, because like we said before, 80% of people that actually lose the weight they want to end up putting it back on within 12 months. So we don't want to do that. Anyway, phase one is always rebuild metabolism for us. That's exactly what we just touched on. We want to get those processes that have adapted negatively. We want to bring them back and make them positive adaptations. So we can definitely do that, and we've seen it happen over the years. We know it can be very quick with some people. They can respond very quick. Some people it takes a little bit longer, depending on the years of damage that's taken place. So that's the key factor in that there. Okay, so last little bit. Rebuild the metabolism, just to jump on that and dive into that a little bit deeper for you. Over the years of working with hundreds of clients, a period of reversing food up and feeding the body what it needs and rebuilding the metabolism has proved crucial for long-term success and success working with us. So the goals for this phase, let's dive into it. So we got goals for this phase and we got action needed, right? So routine, we need to establish a baseline of calories first. You want them to feel energized. You want them to actually establish technique and prime the body. That's what we talk about in the phases of physique development, right? With this presentation. So it's worth a watch, because we do this for every phase. For those of you that haven't seen it, and we do dive deep into this and explain exactly what you should be looking for from every phase. Again, if you've got more to come, then it's exciting to look forward to these things as well. But the goals of a rebuild phase, the phase one, is just routine, feel energized, establish technique, prime the body. So the way we do that is by establishing a baseline calories. We try and slowly build that up over this phase as well. Like we just talked about, try and get those sort of adaptations to become more positive than negative. Micronutrients are fed in as well, because more often than not you haven't got enough energy from macronutrients, but more often than not you're not getting the micronutrients you need as well, because there's just not enough going in. And we monitor training videos, set the foundation, blah blah blah. You all know this because you've been part of this as well. So yeah, just to finish off, an important note: just because you are increasing calories, this is the really important part that we dived into before about with girls as well, to fully understand, because they are more worried than men. When we start increasing calories for men, they tend not to worry too much, because they're like, hey, I can get fat, don't matter, dad bod, a bulking, not sulking, and all that. But when it comes to women, obviously, especially those that are trying to lose weight, so like I said, it could be worst case scenario. It could be someone that's overweight, has been for 20, 30 years, has been told all her life that she has to eat less to lose fat, or lose weight even. So they're addicted to the scales as well, which is a whole different topic. And then they come to us, they invest in us, and the first thing we tell them is, right, you need to eat more. And they're like, they can run a mile. And we've genuinely had some people that we haven't been able to get through, right? And again, this is being honest here, where they just they wouldn't open up or trust us enough to actually go through that process. They wouldn't eat more, and it was that drilled into them, and they wouldn't do it, which is gutting for us, because there's only so much we can do. But yeah, with people that do trust us, we do see it work every single time. It does genuinely work. So anyway, this is just to show you with the graph, give you a clear visual of what happens. So previously under eating, causing a slowdown in the long-term BMR. So this is what someone's deficit would be, the green line, the maintenance would be the orange line, and the surplus would be the red line. This is where they're eating, right? And as a result, this maintenance line has been brought down a lot lower. But as you go up, and as you tell that person to start eating more, as you can clearly see, right, the rebuild phase, increasing calorie consumption and BMR simultaneously improving whilst being in a deficit. So they're still in a deficit. They're still below that green line, which is the ideal deficit. Let's say 500 calorie deficit, which would be a pound of fat loss per week. I'm diving in and going on tangent again. But yeah, so it's well below and in a deficit. So you're still going to be in no danger at all of gaining fat. Gaining weight, however, you're eating more food. So you may see more fluctuations in weight. And this is where people get worried. And this is why I don't like the scales too much, because it's not a perfect gauge or measurement of fat. It's a good measurement of body weight fluctuating, but not fat. So you can't gain that much fat in a matter of days. But yeah, anyway, this is just proof that even though you're increasing your calories, it doesn't mean you're actually in a surplus and you're not going to be gaining body fat. And again, that's just an example of like a free meal going in there. Okay, so I've said lastly too many times, I feel like I've kept you for a long time here. But anyway, how do we actually calculate your calories, your maintenance calories, right? So this is for us now and what we actually do. I did touch on it briefly. We actually do not use any fancy equations that we can give you the secrets to, but we have got an example for you if you do want to try and work something out yourself. Initially, there are great equations out there that can give you a good starting point. However, there isn't any equations out there that take into consideration a person's history with nutrition and training. We have found that this has actually been the biggest impact on how your body operates today. We simply use our experience from working with clients over the years, as well as all of the detail that we just talked about on the previous slides, to establish a good starting point with a new client. Then we simply micromanage week to week as we collect data from the client's feedback and check-ins. You've all been through this with us and you know this is exactly what we do. However, like I said, if you want to have a go at this yourself, then if you are looking to calculate the estimate, you can use this this calculator. It's the Benedict-Harris equation and has been found to be the most accurate out of them all. So this does not include NEAT, EAT, or TEF, right? So this just literally is to work out your BMR. You can then add on additional things to the equation to add those factors in as well, more funky numbers for you. But these are the different equations if you do want to trial them for men and women. And it does look like a funky calculation, but it does work and it does get you somewhat close. So I talked for a long time there and there was a lot of information. So do you have any questions on calculating your calories, TDE, metabolic adaptations, anything at all? Fire them in the chat if you want. Normally we do get a good Q&A going at the end. So if there's any questions you've got, now is the chance to fire them in. I'm going to give you 15 minutes as well. But anyway, Tommy and Shiv, did you enjoy that? Start the convo.
Yeah,
love
man,
that.
really
Yeah.
good.
I
Yeah,
loved it. You're so right about women. I was, could you see me? I was like this, nodding along. So I was like, yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah, we've seen it so many times now.
Yeah, honestly, it's mad. It's crazy.
But they're coming though. They are coming.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Ben, surprised he hasn't got one question. I normally get grilled by Ben as well. Yeah, cool.
Ben.
Yeah, Ben, think of something.
everyone's just relying on Ben.
I know.
Literally. Ben had loads in the team talk I did as well.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah, the most on that one. We were questioning whether Ben had a secret that he wanted to share. Yeah. But have you got any questions then? This is a tough crowd tonight, man. Wow. But I hope you've learned something anyway. I hope you're not just sitting there thinking, oh my God, this is boring. Yeah, have you got any questions in general about what's going on? Anything about nutrition training? Now's the chance to get a good answer or a decent answer.
Come on, Ben.
Come on, Ben. I think we've covered everything so far. Like,
Yeah, no, the thing is, I think because you've gone in detail in so much, I think
Yeah.
any questions could have potentially already been covered.
how many people's heads are blown?
But I think I know one. I think
Go on, son.
so. Didn't I wrong about like BMR, NEAT, and stuff like that?
Yeah.
So no BMR wasn't there. Then what would be the second like up from it? I should say. What would be then the most crucial?
In terms of percentage of like the total daily energy expenditure.
Yeah.
Do you know what? That's a good question, and that's when it becomes completely dependent on the person. Because if someone is doing a ton of cardio, again, I always go back to myself for examples because it's just easy. But when I was towards the end of a prep, I was doing 60 minutes on the Stairmaster a day, and that was burning 1,000 calories before even having breakfast. So when you do calculate it like that, and that is extreme amount of training, and then doing training on top of that, so a weight training session on top of that, that could be an extra 1,500, 1,700 calories just from eat. Then you've got NEAT on top of that with steps. For every 1,000 calories of steps, it's estimated about 50 to 60 calorie burn. So depending on your step target, some people hit 20K a day if they've got a labor intensive job. It really does vary on the person. So I would actually go with NEAT on that one. I'd say that the build up throughout the day of non-exercise activity thermogenesis in someone that's moderately active is probably more than EAT averaged out throughout the week. Unless you are training every day, then it would probably be EAT. And then TEF is just, you're only talking like 150 to 250 calories, I'd say, from TEF. If that, depending on how high your protein in as well, because protein is the biggest contributor to that as well. Anything you want to add, Tommy, Shiv?
No, I agree with you now, mate, to be honest with you.
Yeah, 100%. It all depends on the person, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
On the client.
Yeah.
Is there a way as well that, like, say when I get older, will my metabolism always be like this? Because I'm with mine's like quite fast. So like
your BMR is what declines over time.
right.
So
And
obviously everything else is kind of controlled, isn't it? But your BMR is something that does decline naturally over time. That's why when you look at the equations, age is a factor. So they take into account your age when calculating it. So yeah, basically that's exactly why you hear people say, "Oh, I could get away with this in my 20s and now I can't." It's one of those factors, you know. It's why a lot of people that do have fast metabolisms, because they're not used to having to control what they eat, when they do get into the late 30s or 40s, they end up becoming overweight because they've never had to control it before. And then they don't, and then they go all the way the other way, you know. So that's one for Joe to look out for.
would it matter as well, like
when
with
he's
like
not the ad man anymore.
would it matter as well if like your weight is different? So like say now you can, like me now, I have a fast metabolism, but I'm like coming 70 kg now. But then you could have someone with the same metabolism as me, but weighs a bit heavier and is not as healthy as me. It doesn't do the same sports. Would his metabolism go like slower, quicker than mine, or is it just dependent on the person? If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. That's dependent on the person. But if you were given the scenario of like yourself now, like you weighing 70 kilos and you weighing 80 kilos, that guy weighing 80 kilos is going to be, you know, BMR is going to be a lot higher. Yeah, and that's where people do, like when you hear people say I can't put on muscle, it's just because they've just naturally got a very high BMR. And they think they're eating enough when they're not, and that's the problem. Another thing is when they try to eat enough from just clean foods and they physically can't get more in because they do feel full all the time. That's when it becomes a case of just making sure, right, you hit the bare minimum in terms of micronutrient targets, which we usually work out for you, and then we just say, right, the rest of it you can fill it up from more bad foods. I say bad foods because I don't like the term, but this is what people recognize. And that's when you can enjoy things more, like Cocoa Pops post-workout and stuff like that. It's just easy to get in, and it's bumping up the calories so that you can gain. So yeah, that's why we do that. Okay, cool. I'm not going to grill Ben too much more. I'll leave it there tonight because yeah, I've enjoyed that one, and to be fair, I've talked for the full hour, I think. But yeah, any questions that you've got and any topics you want us to cover, we've got a full team on it now. You know, Tommy and Shiv have done a lot of research into this. You know, I try and make it look as pretty as I can. And yeah, so any questions that you've got, any topics that you want to see in future, make sure you put them in the chat. And because we will go into detail on them, but it seems like you're all struggling for questions now, whereas before we normally